A pleasure to meet all at last. Today, it is December 30th, 2021. I'm more than happy that we're only a couple of days away from all of this nonsense. But I'm also more than happy just to at least give you a first-hand look at what 2022 will have to offer. I've mentioned a lot of stuff that will in fact be in the works, especially within the next 6 months. But yet at the same time, I'm also going to be showcasing a boatload of other different ideas that I will in fact be presenting. So without further ado, let's go on ahead and try something different. So, bam! Yep, as you can see here, I am right over here in the bottom right corner. And today we are going to be trying ourselves something a bit different. This is in fact a tier list that you can see here, ranking from S, A, B, C, D, E, and F. And this range, of course, will have something to do with one thing that I cherish most of all: Nerf blasters. And a lot of people have actually made their own Nerf tier lists, but it's about time that I basically hop on this little bandwagon that's been rolling around on YouTube over the past couple of years, just to give you a first-hand look at what my perspective is in the world of Nerf. And it is in fact rather gigantic, so it's going to take some time for me to put videos like this together. So what better way to pretty much put something like this together than to get started with one line that probably everybody could agree is a bit cheap in any conceivable way. Elite 2.0. Now, I have basically mentioned this before that I would not at all call this Elite 2.0 because a 2.0 can never truly beat a 1.0. In that case, I've basically renamed it to the Super line. And as a result, these Super Blasters are what you'll be seeing in this presentation. We're going to get started with the basic 8s that have first been released in 2020. And a lot of people have been somewhat in and out upon the whole entire concept of having a second Elite series. But the way I see it, whether you want to call it an Elite series or not, even though it is not at all Elite by any means, I feel like that there probably is a lot to desire in this particular case. But you know what though? I feel like that another thing might be missing. A particular title that might be eye-catching and appealing to any kind of audience out there on YouTube. And as a result, let's call this little series Tears of the Clown. And I'm of course the clown because as a seeker, I technically have a lot of apologetic resolution with whatever I can find. A lot of people might hate some things, but I tend to like them because either they're rare, they're disliked, or because they're just plain old obscured things out there in life. And so, in terms of blasters, there's quite a few of them. There's the first 8 that were released in 2020, then in 2021 we got a handful of others, and then we also cannot forget about the fact that there has also been quite a few others that have been released since then. And not to mention the flip shots, as well as some that were released outside of America. So, in more recent times, we have been getting a lot of scoops based on what others we could potentially find in the future. And so, let's go ahead and basically get it going here. First blaster that we got right here is the Commander. Basically, a slide-powered pistol with a 6-dart cylinder in it. Very akin to that of the Maverick or the Strong Arm, or basically most other Rev-style blasters out there. The functionality of this one is rather basic in a way, but it is almost like that of the combination of things like the Spectre Rev 5 and the Maverick Rev 6, because it's a 6-dart cylinder, whereas the Spectre had a 5-dart cylinder. But in addition to having a 6-dart cylinder and a little slide on the top with some rather smooth action to it, as well as the power of slam fire, believe it or not, you can also get very modular with this blaster. And the creativity of this one is pretty impressive by all means. The combination of a barrel adapter, stock adapter, and a handful of tack rails means that this blaster might seem like a small little thing out there that's really basic, but in addition to its typical functionality of most red blasters, you can in fact get creative with this one. Whatever kind of attachments you can find in your house or your bin, wherever you keep most of your Nerf related stuff, you can definitely pick up whatever you can with something like this. And as such, being the first blaster of its kind, the first one that had been leaked, the first one that had been teased, and the first one that had gotten a lot of great impressions from a lot of people out there, I'd say this one is going to be taking an early lead for today's presentation, and it'll go up to A. Second blaster, we have the Volt, and this one is in fact probably the most recent Nightfinder EX3 sort of blaster that we got. But yet this one's a bit different. Instead of having itself a trigger which you can pull slightly and it'll activate the laser, or a secondary trigger that'll activate the laser, this one has a little switch. And I didn't necessarily realize it until quite a while after I first picked mine up. And as a matter of fact, this kind of switch out there, you have to toggle up and down, and it is sitting in the trigger well itself. But other than that, it's also quite basic. Being a Nightfinder, it's a bit obvious. Having a priming rod with a bit of a ring in the center that can allow you to get some good grip, and then of course a single tack reel on top, means this one is probably not quite as good as the Corrector, which of course is the alt name that I've given to the commander. And then of course there's Volt. I call it the Voltage because, well, there's probably a lot of things out there that might have the word Volt in it. But other than that, let's go ahead and give this one a B, pretty much. Not quite as good as the Corrector, but still, it's in a pretty nice place, considering that it's the most recent Nightfinder related blaster that we got. And next we have the Trio, a Jolt with 3 barrels stacked on top of each other. I simply call this one the Triton because Trio sounds very similar to that of Trilogy. And as you know, Trilogy was another blaster that had been released in recent years. But this one was an Elite blaster, and this line claims to be Elite 2.0, but yet I'm never calling it that. I'm never calling anything a 2.0 because it's never going to truly be a 1.0. But otherwise, this one's also rather basic. Having 3 barrels stacked on top of each other only makes it slightly more advanced than that of the Triad, but again, because that's a thing that already exists, except the barrels are stacked on top of each other rather than being formed in a delta sort of pattern. So as a result, let's go ahead and put this one up as a C. So it seems that we're getting lower with every new pick that I'm putting together. But yet, let's just go right off the bat and head on over to the lowest point that I've basically found so far, the Shockwave DS15. This is basically what you would have if you took the rather cheap crap that is surrounding this lineup and then put it together with an already existing Elite blaster, and that of which would be the Surgefire. So as unfortunate as that sounds, the Shockwave DS15 is basically no more than the culmination of having the same exact sort of shape and styling as the Surgefire, but yet it does try to be better in some ways. It tries to have the inability to have slam fire, which I've discovered myself. In case you haven't realized the last ever episode of Nerf Secret Reveal Distance Gauge, that's exactly what happened pretty much. The Shockwave did not in fact utilize slam fire. But what compounds this situation even further is the fact that the drum in this thing is very faulty. And that is certainly something that we would not want to have. So the combination of not being able to have slam fire or having a bad drum would pretty much indicate that this is no more than just a bit of a hunk of hot garbage. So as any possible person out there who would intend to own a product like this, I'd consider steering clear if I were you. So we're just going to go ahead, put that off in D, period. So I feel like what could probably be any worse than that? Well, I guess nothing so far. But let's move on to another one of the first 8, the Phoenix CS6. This is pretty much no more than a Strife. A Strife that has a stock adapter and a barrel adapter, and not to mention its own trademark clip. I pretty much should mention right away that clip system blasters in the Super line are designed in their own particular way. They have their own removable covers, which match up with the main color scheme of cerulean sort of blue, and not to mention many other unique colors that were also found in blasters. But yet the Phoenix CS6 is actually a pretty good blaster, so I'm willing to give them some credit, some kudos, and some inspiration for that point. But yet it's only going to get no more than a C. So if you're willing to argue on that one, that's pretty much your own fault there. But let's move on to another clip system blaster from this lineup, the Echo CS10. This one has a bit of a larger clip, more than 6 darts. Instead it has 10. But in addition to that, this is basically what would happen if you took the Recon from the N-Strike series, but also attempted to put in some more modular capabilities, because I pretty much should mention that the Phoenix also came with its own modular accessory, which was a scope. Very similar to that of the Longshot CS6, but unlike the Phoenix, however, the Echo comes with a barrel and a stock. So it's a bit more modular when you compare it to the majority of other blasters from this line so far, but yet this one's also a pretty good blaster. Probably good enough to the point where I actually still have it with me at this point. I've had to sell a lot of blasters from my collection just so I'd be able to afford newer ones, and this is a pretty considerable amount of depth that I'm pretty much going to have to brace myself for, and we'll see if I actually recover from all this. But yet, let's just say that Echo might only be slightly better than that of the Phoenix, or maybe many of the other blasters that I've had so far within the line itself. And so, I'm giving it a B, pretty much. Next, let's move on to the pinnacle, the peak portion of the entire line so far, the Turbine CS18. Now, there's been a handful of full auto blasters out there that currently exist, but yet this one is practically like the combination of having a rapid strike style, well, full auto technique, and not to mention its own system of flywheels. But much like the Phoenix though, it does in fact take a certain amount of batteries in order to power it, but when you do, you actually get pretty much the biggest part of this whole line. Probably the best of this line so far. And when you basically have something like this, then you know that you're pretty much ready for action. If there's one con I would have to identify though, it's the back end. It's way too short for someone my stature. And as a result, I probably would in fact have to score this lower than I was originally intending to, but yet, it's full auto capabilities, it's modular compatibility, and a handful of other things just are way too amazing to ignore. So there is absolutely no way that I'm giving this thing a score that's any lower than an S. Yeah. Looks like we basically have an early lead right here, everybody. We got the Turbine up here at an S. We got several other blasters and various other parts. But now, let's go ahead and move on to the rough cut reskin of this lineup, known as the Warden. And let me just tell you, first off, this blaster surely did have some sort of faulty mechanisms or other sort of problems that were within it, because when Qualcomm S7 reviewed it last year, this guy had to go through 2 of them, not just one. And believe it or not, they both broke. I'm more than sure that there were some sort of like manufacturing defects that had gone on with both of them, and that could have just been coincidental that both of them had broken down during the review, but that is certainly not an excuse. But yet, it's not necessarily about Qualcomm S7 that has to do with my ranking of this blaster, but rather with my experience overall. It's kind of average, however. Being a rough cut reskin, there's not much else that you can expect from this other than the typical sort of 8 dart arrangement, little pump on the bottom, and the very slanted hand grip that pretty much has that sort of sawn-off shotgun sort of feel to it. And so, being average by any means, let's give it a C. At least just for the fact that, well, it's not at all any better than many others I've done so far. But now let's go ahead and move on to the smallest one that we got so far, the Ace. And yes, for the record, it's no more than a Jolt, but yet it actually does so well that I'm more than willing to be a bit generous for today's session. And so let's just go and give this one an A. Mainly for the fact that it is a bit of a scoped pistol, one-shot pistol, and because Jolts are so big nowadays, it's almost like an epidemic level sort of phenomenon. But in any way, the Jolt is just that popular, and that's pretty much what it is. Even I feel like a big sucker for this one, but let's go ahead and move on to the Technician. For those of you who are aware, yes, this is pretty much no more than a ripoff of the Tiger from the Alpha Strike line. As a matter of fact, there were a handful of Alpha Strike blasters that are constantly being reskinned and being put together towards other lines, mostly as a way to avoid the mass failure of that of the Alpha Strike line as a whole. But yet, the Technician probably doesn't necessarily do a whole lot better, and also because of the fact that it was released exclusively in Australia, meaning I would have to spend a lot of extra money just to have it shipped here, I'm probably just going to go on ahead and give it a C. I'm not necessarily going to be willing to do something that big, unless of course if my other jobs were to be even better than they already are. Now let's go on to the Quadfire. I might as well be honest here really quickly. If you're familiar with the Quad Rot, the zombie strike blaster with 4 barrels stacked on top of each other, a priming rod, and this thing was released in 2019. Since then, it seems like this blaster is constantly being reskinned, repackaged, reshipped, and resold. All the time. But that's not really to say that all cases of the Quadrot reskin have actually turned out bad. I mean, I've talked a bit about the Otter QS4 and the Fang QS4, both of which were Alpha Strike reskins, but one of them was unfortunately worse than the other. And I can't really be sure exactly what to say about these new ones, because it seems like these reskins are happening way too often, way too much now. But just because of the fact that it just seems like we might have a better chance of having a better sort of Quadrot reskin in this fashion compared to the Alpha Strike line, I'm giving it a C. And next, let's move on to some more recent showings. Now, the Technician and Quadfire and the Ace are pretty much as recent as we can potentially get, but yet it seems that in 2022 we'll actually have ourselves a couple more examples of Nerf attempting to be better with this line. So, the first major point of this one, the flagship that we got for this year, is the Eagle Point. And this one, much like the Echo and Phoenix, has modular capabilities, but this one is actually even bigger than most others. So it's probably not just a flagship blaster for the year of 2022, but it might also be a flagship for probably the entire line so far. As far as I know though, I actually got a feeling that not just because of the year 2022 potentially being a way out of all of this nonsense, not just from a pandemic that we're going through right now, but also from a handful of other things. So I got more than enough high hopes that are pretty much going around. The kind of movies that are set for release next year, the kind of video games that are set for release next year, and on top of all that, a lot of other events that are going to be happening in my time. So I'm more than confident about the year 2022, and so I don't necessarily know how this blaster is going to be, but when I do pick it up, I will in fact be reviewing it as part of Nerf Secret Revealed Aftersought Part 2 when that comes out in 2024, and not to mention a Distance Gauge episode of its own in 2023. Pretty much more down the line will also come, but I'm just going to be sticking with the B for the moment. And now let's move on to another pick for 2022, known as the Prospect QS4. Yeah. 2 reskins for the Quadrot for the Super line. Actually, it's very akin to that of what the Alpha Strike line had basically done at first. And then, of course, we have both of them recolored. So in total, that would be like 4 of them. But in actuality, I feel like that this one might also deserve the same sort of score as the Quadfire, because you never really know. Maybe one might be better than the other. Who even knows? But as far as I'm concerned with it, because I don't even have it and I don't even know what to say about it, I'm giving it the same exact scoring as the Quadfire, a C. And finally, let's go ahead and move on to all three of the Flip Shots blasters. Starting with the Flip 8. 8 barrels, a pretty nice way of flipping them in the form of a little slide on top that also doubles as a scope, as well as a Jolt-like priming rod below the grip. Not necessarily too much to add on here. Satisfying sound effects, a good capacity of 8 darts, barrels that flip around and all that good stuff. So I feel like it deserves a B right there. Not necessarily a whole lot, but it's still a good blaster nonetheless. Then let's move on to the Flip 16. Double the capacity of the Flip 8, except this one's way better. And I mean it. Way better. It pretty much just goes to show that Nerf is actually willing to put gimmicks over performance, but that's not really the point here. The Flip 16 is not only better than the Flip 8, but it also has a lot of other things to offer. It's got 2 sets of barrels on both sides of the blaster. Each can hold up to 8 darts, and then you have a little pump grip on the bottom, which is light green, kind of like with the Flip 8 flipping mechanism, which is of course a scope slide on the top, but this one has some pretty satisfying sound effects put into it. As you know, I really do love the sort of satisfying ASMR sound effects that can come out of a lot of things. But it's not only that, but it's also the fact that it has a Spaz 12 style folding stock, which can be put on top of the blaster, or in case you want to use it, just flip it backwards and then flip the little orange extension which pulls out into a part that can be comfortable for your shoulder. I'm also very surprised at the fact that this stock is not at all as flimsy as I would have expected it to be. So in any case possible, I'm more than just going high with the scoring of this one compared to the Flip 8. I'm also doing the world a favor pretty much by just showing that somehow something good can be done. Because, I mean, The Suicide Squad was pretty much the film that I feel like makes the year so good. So, you know what? I'm just gonna have to say, screw it. Let's give this one an S. Absolutely, an S. Yeah. Now, what you might be wondering about the Flip 32, well, I guess probably not a whole lot. Partly because I do not actually own the blaster at this moment, so I don't really have a whole lot left to comment on other than the fact that it has 32 barrels, 32 dart capacity. There's a little grip on the bottom akin to that of the Raider or Rampage, and it also has slide, well, lever action pretty much. Lever action that is very much like what the Slingfire and Scavenger owned. While I feel like the Scavenger is probably the best lever action blaster here, the Flip 32 could potentially be better. But because I feel like the Flip 16 is still the top of the line at this moment, and because I don't even own the blaster yet, let's just go ahead and give it a B for now. Some things could be subject to change, but maybe we might be looking at it differently. I myself have yet to find it for myself, so I can eventually review it and give it my own personal scoring eventually when that comes around. So, well, here you have it pretty much. We got these blasters all put together on a nice tier list, and I'm actually more than happy about what has basically taken place so far. This line has surely gotten really big over the years. It was already way too big in 2020, but yet there were some great blasters that had come out during that year. 2021 may not have been as big, but it did have itself a few unique merits that I didn't really feel would come around with this line. And then as for what we're expecting next year, we might actually have a chance to make the series way better than it was. So, at this point in time, I actually will go ahead and say, thank you very much for watching through this whole entire thing. And more importantly, thank you very much for liking, subscribing, and also sticking around with me as this whole year comes to an entire close. I will in fact be discussing this year based on the top 50, or maybe just a highlight reel of the 50 reasons why 2021 is the worst year to ever exist in history, period. So, do keep a lookout for that one tonight, because this is exactly what is going to happen, whether you like it or not. And whether you want to keep 2020 as the worst year ever when it's not even close to true, that's more or less up to you. Up until I put together an anti-hate act based on it. So, you only have a matter of time before all the hate against 2020, calling it a dumpster fire, calling it the worst year ever, is all going to be removed from existence. Period. Because we are not going to tolerate the lies any longer. Until any of that happens, though, be sure to keep a lookout for whatever content I got here. And make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.